It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the movies of June 18th, 1993. We only got two movies to look at today. They weren't the most well-received movies. They weren't the biggest hits at the box office, but they're a lot better than you might think they are. And I'll show you what I mean. I'll tell you what I mean, I should say. Let's go ahead and take a look at the biggest new release of the weekend, and that was Arnold Schwarzenegger in Last Action Hero.
The madman known as the Ripper have totally broken down, and there is no word on the hostages.
Police have surrounded the ground floor, and SWAT teams are moving into position.
Oh my God, they're shooting at us! Get down!
The situation is out of control. The police are
Is that a special hostage negotiator has been called in,
what they
but
need down here is an armored division. This is completely insanity. I've never seen anything like it.
right now there's a truck directly in the line of fire guns.
This may be the hostage negotiator police we're talking about. Slater!
You may remember Detective Slater from an earlier story. He is notorious in police circles for his unusual tactics and...
Don't even think it, Slater. You hear me?
Nonetheless, Slater is known throughout the city as someone who gets the job done.
Then you go in there, and it's your badge.
Sorry, not yet. Come back later.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, Last Action Hero, the big ticket for 93.
Great trailer, by the way. Very underrated teaser trailer for this movie. But this movie is one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's first major bombs as an action star. But honestly, when you look back, there's a couple of reasons why that is, and basically, you could pretty much start it off with Universal's release of Jurassic Park, which was moved up to June 11th, 1993, well after Sony had placed it on June 18th. So that was the first caveat right there. Second of all, the movie was reportedly the first to have an advertisement placed on a space-going rocket. The film was capsized with a wave of negative publicity after a rough cut of it was shown to a preview audience in May. Sony then literally tried to destroy the test cards, and the word of mouth proved to be more catastrophic for the movie. The shooting and editing schedule was so demanding and so close to the release date, they said that they shouldn't have had Siskel and Ebert telling us the movie is 10 minutes too long. That's literally what somebody on Sony basically said. Not only that, Sony was even more humiliated the weekend after the film opened when the movie lost over 47% of its audience, and TriStar's Sleepless in Seattle, which TriStar was also as a part of Sony, opened at the number 2 movie at the box office. The final total for this movie was $26 million lost, and Last Action Hero was the first movie released with the Sony Dynamic Digital Sound. Unfortunately, only a few theaters were set up for that format, and many of those experienced the technical problems with the new system, including some people at Paramount basically saying, it's basically referring to it as still doesn't do shit. So that's not a very good sign at all. It doesn't also help that there was a lot of script doctors on this, uncredited work by people like Carrie Fisher, Larry Ferguson, William Goldwyn. The movie itself was supposed to be a parody of films written by Shane Black, and then Shane Black himself actually was later credited as one of the screenwriters for it. And like I said before, it was the first major misfire from Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had a pretty good stretch of movies up to that point that were big successes. But I think only a couple that I know from that is before this came out that were really big misfires were Raw Deal and Red Heat. Everything else in between there was a somewhat profitable hit until this movie came around, and it was a butt of many jokes for a number of TV shows at the time. I know The Critic had a great joke about it, where Jay was going to get replaced by a dolphin not a seal that can review movies, and when the seal starts to attack Jay's boss goes, "Last Action Hero," and the seal's just like, "Oh God, not again!" And Last Action Hero did not have the best track record back then, but 30 years later, honestly, it's a movie that's kind of ahead of its time when you really think about the concept and just the fact that it was able to make fun of not only action movies as a whole, but just movies at the time, blockbuster films that in general at the time, there's a lot of things about this movie that really do work. I think the visuals overall are very fun. I think there are some very funny jokes in this movie. Like there's a like probably one of my favorite ones is where they go into a video store in the Jack Slater movie world, and the kid's trying to prove to Schwarzenegger that he's an actor in a movie, and he tries to find Terminator 2. They find a Terminator 2 poster, and instead of Schwarzenegger, it's Sylvester Stallone as the Terminator, which that's a really funny scene. And there's a lot of moments like this. There's a lot of cameos in this movie. You not only have Art Carney in here, Mercedes Ruehl. You also have F. Murray Abraham, Bobby Brown, Art. No, Art Carney is the one. I said Art Carney is the guy in the movie. Robert Prosky is the projectionist. But not only that, there's a ton of cameos in this movie. You have Franco Columbu, who is a fellow bodybuilder and friend of Schwarzenegger's. Tina Turner, Sharon Stone, and Robert Patrick in this movie, basically reprising their roles from Basic Instinct and Terminator 2. Michael Muscat, who was in Terminator 2 as well, and was also the acting coach for Edward Furlong. Angie Everhart is in here. There's a ton of cameos from different celebrities when they go to the premiere at the end of the film. Maria Shriver, Little Richard, Lisa Gibbons, Jim Belushi, Damon Wayans, Chevy Chase, Jean-Claude Van Damme. MC Hammer is in here. Wilson Phillips, Ian McKellen playing Death, Joan Plowright, Danny DeVito doing kind of like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit type of thing where he plays like a cartoon cat. And it's an insane amount of names in this movie, and there's even a scene where Schwarzenegger's character in the movie meets Arnold Schwarzenegger himself, and it's just like it's just insane the levels that they go to in this movie, and overall it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun all around, but there are a lot of things about this movie that don't work. First of all, it's over 2.5 hours long, which in 1993 is a little bit much. There's scenes in this movie that make no sense whatsoever. There's a long scene early in the movie where the kid gets mugged by somebody in his own home, and it's just like, is this really necessary? Like, is this really something that needs to be in this movie? The daughter in the movie, within a movie, played by Bridget Wilson. Brigitte Wilson. She's good, but man, when she screams, it's just so annoying. Like, it's like, oh my god, like, I get it, she's supposed to be the damsel in distress, kind of like a damsel in distress type of thing, but man, like, the way she screams in this movie is just, it gets annoying really, really fast, and there's a lot of moments in here that don't work. There are jokes that don't really work all that well, but overall, man, the movie is really a ton of fun. There are definitely moments that could have easily been cut out of it overall, but you know what? The movie overall is, like I said, a ton of fun. I think it's one of Schwarzenegger's, it's maybe one of his most underrated movies, because he's made a lot worse movies than this one. I can think of stuff like Junior, Collateral Damage, what else is another one I can think of? I can't think of another one on the top of my head, but those are the two that really come to mind. As I think those movies are much worse than this movie is, and yeah, it's a fun movie. Is it a great movie? No, it's not a great movie overall. It definitely has a lot of moments in here that are really, really pointless, really unnecessary, but it is still a ton of fun. It's still a movie that's very entertaining. It's still a movie that's a ton of fun. It's a good summer blockbuster movie, and I think the movie would have been a success if they had moved it a little bit further away than Jurassic Park, instead of trying to release it the weekend afterward. Like, they thought that Jurassic Park was just going to be a one-weekend thing, and then all of a sudden, boom, here comes this movie. And turns out that's not the case. I mean, Jurassic Park has a long legacy to it, and Last Action Hero, it's a movie that for a while was seen as a major flop, but has grown to have a cult following over the years. It even recently got a nice 4K release from Sony, so even Sony finally starting to admit that, okay, this movie wasn't as bad as we initially thought it was. But, yeah, overall, the movie is a ton of fun. I think it is a very enjoyable film that does a very good job of satirizing action films of the time period. It knows it's trying to be more fun, more over the top than most movies like that. Like, it's basically making fun of. It's a good fun time. It's not a great movie all the way through. It's a very flawed film, but you know what? It's a ton of fun all around. I can't recommend it enough. If you want to see a good, fun movie from Schwarzenegger, Last Action Hero is definitely it. Just be prepared for some for some scenes that go that go nowhere, and just. But overall, you should come out of there feeling very good about it, even if you go in there with the right mindset. So yeah, that's Last Action Hero. Now let's move on to the other new release of the weekend, and that is a much smaller movie, but was a movie that didn't do so well, but it has kind of a lasting legacy, at least to me. I'll tell you all about it once I show you the trailer for Once Upon a Forest.
It is morning in your life. Day is breaking, oh so bright.
From the creator of An American Tale, meet the Furlings. They're fun, they're funny, and they're full of mischief.
Furlings!
But their friend Michelle needs a magic potion.
You only have 2 days' time.
Think we should take this?
Now they're on their own and off on an incredible journey. Join Abigail, the leader,
We can take care of ourselves, thank you.
Edgar, the brave,
I'm drowning! Get up. Oh.
and Russell, the one with an enormous appetite for adventure.
Stuck in your stomach.
From the courageous to the outrageous. Come along as they leap into action. Swim against the odds. And together, come up with the perfect plan to reach for the sky.
You don't really mean fly. Michelle's counting on us.
Well, flap their little paws and fly like birdies.
We'll show you. Great! Don't wind her uppers!
20th Century Fox presents a high-flying adventure that will send your spirits soaring. Once Upon a Forest, featuring the voices of Michael Crawford, Broadway's legendary Phantom,
Stupendous!
and the fabulous Ben Vereen.
There's gonna be some celebrating today.
Once Upon a Forest.
So this is a movie that I remember watching a lot when I was a kid. I remember that this was one of the first movies that I remember watching on videotape over and over again. It was a movie that I remember seeing a whole lot on videotape, and it's a movie that I saw a lot as a kid, but as I grew up, it's a movie that kind of went away from me for the most part. But it has an interesting history behind it. It was produced by Hanna-Barbera. This was before they became part of Warner Brothers, and the director of this, Charles Grosvenor, had been working at Hanna-Barbera for the longest time before he eventually became more well-known for directing the Land Before Time direct-to-video sequels. David Kirshner, the producer of this, also created An American Tale and the far more adult Child's Play series. But yeah, and William Hanna was the executive producer on it too, and I think Joe Barbera was too. Looking back on it now, it's a nice looking movie. It's a visually pleasing looking film, a nicely animated movie. A good overall voice cast. You have Michael Crawford from the Phantom of the Opera, Ben Vereen. You also have Janet Waldo in here, Elizabeth Moss, who is more known now for her work in Mad Men, but she was actually a prolific child actor. She was in this. She was also in Frosty Returns, which since we're coming in December now, as I'm recording this is Frosty Returns is one of those interesting specials that I've talked about it before on the site. If you've ever gone and watched it again, it's one of the most bizarre specials you will ever see, because it's trying to be a sequel to Frosty the Snowman, and it's really failing miserably at it, and it kind of knows that it's not doing that. If you watch it again this holiday season, definitely see what I mean, because I've talked about it before on the site. It's a weird special, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about Once Upon a Forest. But overall, the animation overall is very nicely done. The story is overall, it's a decent story. It's not the best story overall, and it's kind of weird. It's kind of a weird way to send these characters off onto this adventure. Like, it's not like an American Tale where you can really understand the situation that Fievel is in. These three kids are basically being sent out by their, I guess, their caretaker or their uncle or the uncle of the kid who's sick, and they're basically he's basically giving them 2 days to go find these herbs to make this potion to save her life. And like, if he, like, it's weird that it's one of those situations where the dude could have easily gone and do it himself. Like, he could have just left the kids with their friend who's dying on them, but then you wouldn't have a movie then. It's weird. It's like the three characters themselves, they're okay, but there's nothing really about them that makes them stand out. You've got the scaredy cat. You've got the kid who likes to eat a lot, because that's a lot of movies did that back then. You've got the kid who's also smart, even though nobody wants to admit that she's smart. And it's just and there's nothing really all that interesting about them. It's interesting the adventures they go on. It's interesting how they go on these adventures and get themselves in these situations, but it's definitely a very flawed film. But I will say this, though. The one thing I think this movie has going with it compared to other movies like this is that the overall environmental theme in this movie is actually not as bad as you would think it is. It's not really sticking it into your face like most animated environmental movies would. There is a little bit of a pro and con to the situations that these characters find themselves in, and the overall environmental message of the film. And while it's not perfect overall, I do have to give him credit for at least trying to go into this idea here. But it's a very interesting scenario here, and it does make me appreciate this movie maybe a little bit more than most people would. It actually is a lot better than I think a lot of people give it credit for. It's a movie. It's very flawed. It's a very flawed film in the story department, character-wise, but the adventure they go on is overall very enjoyable, and I do like the fact that they do kind of change around the environmental message of the film a little bit more than you would think it would. And I'll say it this, it's a decent film. For little kids, I think they can definitely enjoy it and get a kick out of it. It's not something that's going to require a whole lot of repeat viewing from an older person like me. Like, maybe once in a while I'll go back to it and be like, I remember watching this as a kid. I think it's kind of fun. And I think kids will definitely find enjoyment in this. Adults, probably not so much, even though there are some moments in here that maybe it may seem a little more adult and may take them back when this came out when they were little. But yeah, overall, I'd say this movie works better for kids and maybe people like me that grew up with it a little bit. But overall, if you've never even heard of this movie and you're looking for something to give the kids to watch, the kids will definitely enjoy it. The adults, not so much. That's probably the best way to describe it. So, there you go. That's Once Upon a Forest. And so on that note, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Next time we meet, we've got 3 movies to look at, including Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in the romantic comedy Sleepless in Seattle, the second of the 3 movies that they were in together. We also have Walter Matthau as Mr. Wilson in Dennis the Menace, written by John Hughes, and also House of Cards. Not the Kevin Spacey House of Cards, but a different House of Cards. So we'll look at those 3 films next time, but until then, thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another episode. So thank you for watching, I'll see you next time, and until then, as always, take care.